Okay, how about Claire McCaskill? You mentioned that earlier. Her first and only challenger thus far is Sarah Steelman, the former treasurer for the great state of Missouri, Dick.
Sure. Well, I have always really supported Sarah because she was the first financial officer in the country when she was treasurer of Missouri to demand that Missouri's pension funds not invest in any company that does business with Iran or with North Korea. And she was the first one to do that, and it really set up a precedent which dozens of other states have followed. And now the federal sanctions that Hillary is in the process of applying really are based on the initial cut that Sarah Steelman took.
Now, Dick, I don't know if you followed. The Post-Dispatch yesterday indicates that she's been investing personally in mutual funds that have money in the countries that she was urging institutional investors to avoid.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk with you, because that piece is so unfair. It isn't that she owns stock in a company that does business in Iran. It's that she participates in a mutual fund.
Right.
And over the course of the years, some of those mutual funds were invested in some of those companies. Now, anyone who has a mutual fund knows you can't control what the fund does. 90% of the time, you don't even know what the fund is doing. They hold hundreds of stocks. They change them every day, and they don't notify their people each time they make a purchase. She bought these mutual funds 10 years ago. And over the course of the years, sometimes they invested in a company that might have done some business in Iran, like Shell Oil or like Siemens. And there is no way that you can stop that in a mutual fund. In fact, Sarah has been fighting to create mutual funds, just like the ones she created when she was treasurer, that spend a lot of money screening their investments to make sure that none of them go to companies that are doing business in Iran. And nobody has set that up yet, but she's been fighting to get it set up.
Dick,
and to make it sound like she was investing in companies that do business with Iran is ridiculous.
Well, yeah, and it's not as if these companies like UBS and Siemens and who else is on the Shell, as you mentioned, if they're corporate pariahs. But let me play the other side for a moment. If she's telling institutional investors to stay away from companies that do business in terrorist states, couldn't she find a terror-free mutual fund for her own personal portfolio?
No, because they don't exist.
They don't exist?
They don't exist. There isn't one. There never was any fund of any sort, institutional or individual, until she came along. And then she worked with Frank Gaffney at the Center for Security Policy to set up a vehicle where institutions could make large investments, and they could be confident that they were not dealing with terror-sponsoring companies or companies that did business in Iran. And the thing is, it takes a huge amount of money to be able to investigate the companies and make sure that you're right. So they can afford that for large investors like the state of Missouri or the state of California. And that was Sarah's contribution. But a mutual fund that just takes, $5,000 from some individual can't afford to do that. And there is no such thing as a mutual fund that guarantees that it is free of investment in any company that does business in Iran. And Sarah has been trying to get that set up. That's what she does for a living.
Yeah.
She works on promoting that.
I'll take your word for that at the moment, but it seems to me that there are these, I don't know if they return a good yield or a return on investment, Dick, but aren't there some mutual funds that allow people who are, want to turn swords into plowshares to invest in such companies?
There are mutual funds that promise not to pollute. There are mutual funds that say they don't promote global warming. But there is no such thing as a mutual fund that guarantees that none of its companies do business in Iran and North Korea. It doesn't exist. And to criticize Sarah Steelman for being in mutual funds that do what every other mutual fund does is just wrong.
So who's getting this information to the Post-Dispatch,
I'm sure the Democrats are. I'm sure it's part of Claire McCaskill's trying to push back on the candidacy, which is ironic, by the way, because when you get to investments, her husband owns a reinsurance company as his major business that is headquartered in Bermuda to avoid federal taxation.
Well, he's also a developer in Missouri. Is that a side business of his, or? I don't know. Her husband's name is Joe Shepard, and I'll look into that. Well, now, let me ask you, in an interest of full disclosure, are you working with Ms. Steelman this year?
No, I'm not. But I really encourage her, and I'm really delighted that she's running.
Very interesting. Well,
I can look that up. Just 1 second. I have the info right here on McCaskill.
I'll tell you something. It's possible the information has come from the Republican camp, because in this state, at least when she was running against Kenny Hulshoff, there was no shortage of opposition research, Mr. Morris, when it came to Hulshoff versus Steelman. Sure.
I know, but of course that was a primary. I think that it's different now. The fact is that her, I'm just pulling it up here, her husband owns a reinsurance company based in Bermuda, which is valued at up to $1 million, according to her own estimates. And it's a reinsurance company in a foreign country.
Is he $1 million?
In Bermuda. $1 million, yeah.
Well, that's not much of an insurance company.
Well, his holdings in it are valued at up to $1 million. And the New York Times explains that the way you avoid taxes by locating in Bermuda is that you don't have to actually pay your American tax until you repatriate the money. And Bermuda does not have doesn't tax corporate profits.
That's what Halliburton does.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well,
but a U.S. senator shouldn't be doing that. But McCaskill, I think, is very vulnerable. There are 11 Democratic incumbents come from that are up next year, come from states the Republicans carried this past year, and one of them is McCaskill from Missouri.
I think it's fair to say the 2012 race has just begun. Hey, want to thank you very much, Dick Morris, for taking our phone call today.
Well, thank you.
Have a great holiday season. Hope to talk to you in 2011.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Right, you too. That's Dick Morris with us. Folks, 314-436-7900, 800-925-1120. Forever and a day, as the state treasurer, Sarah Steelman, was encouraging investors on the institutional level not to invest in companies that were doing business with terrorist states. Turns out, according to a story that was published yesterday at stltoday.com, Jake Wagman, the reporter, that she, in her own personal portfolio, had mutual funds that contained companies like UBS and Shell and Siemens and Halliburton that had business in countries that we would find objectionable, terrorist states. Well, of course, the vice president was the head of Halliburton, right, at one point. So Halliburton does business in all sorts of countries. A lot of these companies do. 314-436-7900 and 800-925-1120. It's a little convoluted, but essentially, when she was encouraging institutions, states, pension funds, whatever, she invest in companies that don't do business in terrorist states. Turns out her own portfolio does include mutual funds, which have invested in companies that do just that. All right. You can sit in judgment of Sarah Steelman at 314-436-7900, 800-925-1120. Dick Morris just with us on KMOX.